The transmission was short, encrypted, and dripped with the kind of arrogance you only find in the high towers of core worlds. Cargo inbound Ronin disposal protocol initiated on my end. She's your problem now. Don't expect payment beyond the scrap value. The holographic face of High Lord Valerius sneered before cutting out. I sat in the command chair of the Iron Mule, watching the docking clamps engage on the external monitor. The old ship groaned around me. She was a hunk of welded military surplus and patched up freighter parts, smelling permanently of ozone, burnt hydraulic fluid, and stale recycled air. She wasn't pretty, but she was thick-skinned and loyal, like me. I rubbed the scar tissue running down the left side of my face, a habit when I sensed trouble. My silver chest armor, scuffed and dented from 2 decades of brushfire wars, felt heavier than usual today. The orange stripe across the chest plate, the mark of my old unit, seemed faded in the harsh yellow glare of the bridge lights. Cargo, that's what he called her. The airlock cycled with a hiss of decompression that sounded like a dying breath. I stood up, my boots clanging against the metal deck plating, and walked toward the bay. I didn't run. A Ronin doesn't run toward a mess like this. You walk steady so you can see everything before it sees you. When the inner hatch slid open, steam vented into the cramped corridor. The transport pod they'd stuffed her into was a standard munitions crate. Cold steel meant for missiles, not living things. It sat there on the mesh flooring, looking wildly out of place among the coils of spare wiring and oily engine parts that lined my cargo bay. The lid popped open with a mechanical groan. She didn't come out fighting. She didn't come out crying. She barely came out at all. First I saw the ears, long tapered points twitching nervously against the rim of the metal crate. Then the skin, a deep twilight blue that looked almost bruised in the unforgiving light of my ship. She was huddled in the fetal position, knees pulled to her chest, wrapped in a torn synth silk gown that might have once been elegant, but was now just rags. "Out," I said. My voice came out gravelly, rougher than I intended. The ship's air was dry, always dry. She flinched so violently her shoulder cracked against the crate's edge. She didn't make a sound, just squeezed her eyes shut. Golden eyes. I'd seen them for a fraction of a second before she hid them. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, trying to dial back the command tone in my voice. It was a tone built for ordering squads into kill zones, not coaxing frightened creatures out of boxes. "But you can't stay in there. The radiation shielding in this bay is garbage. You'll fry." Slowly, agonizingly slowly, she uncurled. When she stood, she was taller than I expected, but painfully thin. You could see the ridges of her collarbone beneath the blue skin. She stepped out of the crate, her bare feet shivering against the cold metal grating of the floor. She wouldn't look at me. She kept her head bowed, her long silver-white hair falling forward like a curtain to hide her face. This was the daughter High Lord Valerius had thrown away. A political inconvenience, the rumors said. Born wrong, too frail, a stain on his perfect lineage. So he packed her into a missile crate and shipped her to the edge of known space, to a washed-up human mercenary flying a rusted bucket of bolts. It made my stomach turn. Not her, him, the waste of it. The cruelty wrapped in silk and protocol. "Name," I said. She murmured something unintelligible at the floor. "I don't speak Whisper's name." She took a shallow, trembling breath. "Lyra, Unit 7 Beta, property of House Valerius." "Wrong answer," I said. Her head snapped up, golden eyes wide with terror. She expected a blow. She braced for it, her thin arms crossing over her chest. "You're on the Iron Mule now," I told her, stepping aside to clear the path to the main corridor. "There are no units here. No property, just crew and cargo. You aren't cargo anymore. So Lyra, just Lyra." She stared at me, trying to process the words. It was like I was speaking a dead language. I was a human, a Ronin, silver armor, scarred face, a weapon in a holster at my hip. Everything about me screamed threat to a creature like her. Everything in her life had probably taught her that men built like me were only instruments of pain. "Move," I said, gesturing down the narrow hallway where the yellow emergency lights buzzed. "Mess hall? You look like you haven't eaten in a cycle." I walked ahead, not waiting for her. I could hear her hesitating, her bare feet making almost no sound on the metal. Then the soft pat-pat-pat as she followed, a timid shadow trailing a tank. The mess hall was the heart of the ship, which wasn't saying much. It was a small metal table bolted to the floor, 2 magnetic chairs and a food synthesizer that groaned louder than the engines when it worked. The air here always smelled faintly of burned coffee and engine grease. It was cramped, functional, and about as welcoming as a prison cell. I punched a code into the synthesizer. It spat out a gray nutrient block onto a metal tray, steaming slightly. It tasted like wet cardboard mixed with vitamins, but it would keep you alive in a war zone. I slid the tray across the table toward the empty chair. Sit. Eat. Lyra stood by the doorway, clutching her rags around her thin frame. Her golden eyes darted from me to the food, then back to the door. She was calculating escape routes. In a ship this size, there were none. "It's not poisoned," I grunted, sitting down in my own chair. The metal creaked under my armored weight. "If I wanted you dead, I would have left you in the airlock." She slowly approached the table, moving with a strange fluid grace despite her fear. She sat on the edge of the chair, ready to bolt. She looked at the gray block, then up at me. I require permission, Master," she whispered. The word hit me harder than a plasma round to the chest plate. "Master." I leaned forward, resting my scarred forearms on the metal table. The orange stripe on my chest caught the light. "Listen to me closely, Lyra. I am nobody's master. And you are nobody's slave, not on this ship. You eat when you're hungry. You sleep when you're tired. You breathe because you're alive. You don't need permission to exist." She stared at me, her alien eyes pools of confusion. The concept was totally foreign to her. This was what her noble father had done. He hadn't just starved her body. He had starved her spirit until she thought she needed authorization just to consume calories. If you've ever seen a living thing beaten down so far it forgets it has the right to fight back, you know the kind of cold anger that started burning in my gut. Right then. It's a quiet rage, the kind that settles deep in my bones. "Eat," I said again, softer this time. With trembling blue fingers, she broke off a small piece of the nutrient block. She brought it to her lips, hesitant, eyes watching me the whole time to see if it was a trick. When she finally put it in her mouth, her whole body shuddered. It wasn't the taste was awful. It was the act of eating without punishment. She ate quickly then, ravenously, breaking off chunks and swallowing them almost whole. It was messy, undignified, and the most honest thing I'd seen in months. I watched her, saying nothing. I saw the way her delicate, pointed ears swiveled toward every creak and groan of the ship's hull. This place terrified her. The metal, the noise, the smell of old oil. To her high-born sensibilities, the Iron Mule must have seemed like a dungeon. When she was finished, she pushed the tray away and immediately lowered her head again, waiting for the bill to come due. "Follow me," I stood up. "Quarters." I led her down the starboard corridor, past the engine room where the thrum of the reactor core vibrated through the soles of your boots. The heat bloomed out from the sealed doors. Lyra shrank away from it, pressing herself against the opposite wall as we passed. I stopped at a cabin door, one of the few guest bunks. It was small, meant for temporary transport of soldiers, a narrow bunk built into the wall, a metal locker, a small sink. Luxury accommodations by my standards. I palmed the door open. "Yours." The lock works from the inside. Nobody comes in unless you open it, not even me. She stepped inside, looking around the cramped gray metal box as if I'd offered her a palace. She ran a hand over the thin thermal blanket on the bunk. "Why?" She turned to me, her golden eyes searching my scarred face for the lie, for the hidden cruelty. "Why are you doing this?" "I am unwanted. I am defective cargo." I looked at this frail blue creature, shivering in the doorway of a metal closet, terrified of kindness because it felt more dangerous than abuse. Her father, the High Lord, saw something broken. Something to be discarded because it didn't fit his perfect picture. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my armored arms. I've spent 20 years fixing things people said were broken. Ships, weapons, sometimes people. I know the difference between something useless and something that's just been treated like garbage by an idiot who didn't know what he had. Her hearing was sensitive. I saw her ears twitch at the word idiot applied to her father. "Rest," I said. "We jump to hyperspace in 2 hours. It gets bumpy." I hit the door seal and walked away before she could ask any more questions I didn't want to answer. I headed for the bridge. I needed the routine, check the fuel levels, calibrate the nav computer. Simple things, metal and math. Things that didn't look at you with terrified golden eyes and call you master. I sat in the pilot seat staring at the starfield on the main viewport. A million cold points of light. I was a Ronin, a masterless samurai floating in a tin can. I lived contract to contract, no allegiances, no roots. My life was simple, hazardous but simple. Now I had Lyra aboard, a high-born outcast with a bounty on her head just for existing. Valeria said she was my problem now. He was right about that. I just didn't realize yet that she wasn't a problem I needed to solve. She was the solution I hadn't known I needed. The ship gave a violent shudder, interrupting my thoughts. A red warning light started flashing on the console. Proximity alert, not another ship. Debris field. Damn it, I muttered, my hands flying across the controls. Hold together, old girl. I threw the ship into a hard bank. The inertial dampeners whined, struggling to keep up. Metal screamed against metal. Suddenly, the bridge door hissed open. Lyra stumbled in, thrown off balance by the maneuver. She fell to her knees on the grating, her hands clapping over her sensitive ears against the blare of the proximity alarm. Get back to your quarters. I roared over the noise, fighting the yoke as a chunk of defunct satellite clipped our port shielding. The impact rocked the whole ship. She didn't move. She was frozen, staring at the main viewport where jagged pieces of metal tumbled through the void past us. Her terror was absolute, paralyzing. Lyra, move. I unbuckled, ready to physically drag her back to safety if I had to. That's when she pointed. Her blue arm, thin as a rail, shot out toward the tactical display screen on my console. Her finger was shaking, pointing right at a dense cluster of red dots, the heart of the debris field we were plowing into. The pattern, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible even over the alarms, but it cut through somehow. What? I snapped, glaring at her. The pattern, she said louder, her golden eyes locking onto mine, frantic but suddenly focused. It's not random drift, it's a grid. Artificial magnetic turbulence. She looked at the readouts I had ignored, numbers scrolling too fast for me to parse while flying. There, a gap. 7 degrees port, inclination down 3. I looked at where she was pointing. To me, it looked like suicide. A wall of spinning metal trash. But she saw something else. A current aflow. I had 2 seconds to decide. Trust my own eyes and try to blast through, or trust the defective alien girl shivering on my floor who had never been on a spaceship before today. Sometimes survival isn't about being the toughest thing in the void. Sometimes it's about knowing when to shut up and listen to the quietest voice in the room. I shoved the yoke hard left and dove. The ship screamed, that's the only word for it. The hull groaned under G-forces. The Iron Mule hadn't felt since the siege of Tartarus. My teeth rattled in my skull as we threaded the needle. To the naked eye, the gap Lyra had pointed to was nothing but a chaotic swirl of spinning metal shards. To the ship's sensors, it was a wall of magnetic interference, but we went through. I felt the artificial gravity compensators whine and fail for a split second, pinning me to the pilot's seat with invisible hands. Then silence, or as much silence as you get in deep space. The roar of the debris field faded behind us, replaced by the steady rhythmic thrum of the ion drives. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were white-knuckled on the yoke. I turned the chair. Lyra was still on the floor, curled into a tight ball, her hands clamped over her ears, shaking like a leaf in a storm. We're clear, I said. My voice was rough, the adrenaline crash hitting me hard. She didn't move, she just rocked back and forth, a low keen escaping her throat. I unbuckled and walked over to her. My heavy boots clanked on the deck. I knelt down, the servos in my silver armor hissing. Lyra, look at me. She stopped rocking but didn't look up. Too loud, she whispered. Everything is so loud. I frowned. The bridge was quiet. The alarms were off. Then I looked at the tactical display again. The gap she had found, that it wasn't visual. It was a localized magnetic null zone. The debris was being pushed away from it by intense magnetic fields. You didn't see a hole in the rocks, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. You heard the magnetic fields? She finally looked up. Her golden eyes were red-rimmed, filled with shame. I'm sorry, she stammered. I tried to block it out. Father, High Lord Valerius. He said it was a defect. A sensory processing error. The madness, he called it. I stared at her. A defect? In deep space navigation, being able to sense magnetic flux without a computer was worth more than a dreadnought. It was a 1 in a billion mutation, and Valerius, that arrogant silk-wearing fool, had thrown her away because her senses were too sharp for his polite society dinners. It's not madness, I said, my voice low. It's radar, biological radar. I stood up and offered her a hand. She looked at my scarred, calloused palm like it was a weapon. Then tentatively, she placed her thin blue fingers in mine. Her skin was cool, mine is rough. I pulled her up. Come on, I said. If the ship is too loud for you, we need to fix that. We spent the next 3 cycles, about 70 hours, tearing apart her quarters. She didn't move. She just rocked back and forth, a low keen escaping her throat. I unbuckled and walked over to her. My heavy boots clanked on the deck. I knelt down, the servos in my silver armor hissing. "Lyra, look at me." She stopped rocking but didn't look up. "Too loud," she whispered. "Everything is so loud." I frowned. The bridge was quiet. The alarms were off. Then I looked at the tactical display again. The gap she had found. It wasn't visual. It was a localized magnetic null zone. The debris was being pushed away from it by intense magnetic fields. "You didn't see a hole in the rocks," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "You heard the magnetic fields." She finally looked up. Her golden eyes were red-rimmed, filled with shame. "I'm sorry," she stammered. I tried to block it out. "Father, High Lord Valerius," he said it was a defect, a sensory processing error. The madness, he called it. I stared at her. A defect? In deep space navigation, being able to sense magnetic flux without a computer was worth more than a dreadnought. It was a 1 in a billion mutation, and Valerius, that arrogant silk-wearing fool, had thrown her away because her senses were too sharp for his polite society dinners. "It's not madness," I said, my voice low. "It's radar, biological radar." I stood up and offered her a hand. She looked at my scarred, calloused palm like it was a weapon. Then tentatively she placed her thin blue fingers in mine. Her skin was cool. Mine was rough. I pulled her up. "Come on," I said. "If the ship is too loud for you, we need to fix that." We spent the next 3 cycles, about 70 hours, tearing apart her quarters. I didn't have soundproofing foam, so I improvised. I used acoustic dampening mats from the engine room, lining the walls of her small cabin until it was a padded cell of silence. I rerouted the power conduits that ran behind her bulkhead, so the 60-cycle hum wouldn't vibrate through her skull while she slept. She watched me the whole time, sitting on a crate, her knees pulled to her chest. She didn't speak, but her eyes tracked every movement of my hands. She was waiting for the bill, waiting for me to demand something in return. When I finished, I stepped back and sealed the vents to low-flow mode. The room went dead silent. The constant thrum of the ship disappeared. Lyra let out a sigh that seemed to deflate her entire body. For the first time since she came aboard, her shoulders dropped. The tension that held her like a vice evaporated. "Better?" I asked, wiping grease from my hands onto a rag. She looked at me, and for a second the fear was gone, replaced by something else, awe. "Confusion?" "Why?" she asked again. This took effort, resources. "Because you're crew now," I grunted, tossing the rag into a bin. "Crew takes care of the ship. The captain takes care of the crew. That's the code. Most people in this galaxy think code means a password to a bank account. But for guys like me, guys who have spent half their lives in the mud and the other half in the dark, a code is the only thing that keeps you from becoming a monster." Over the next few weeks, the Iron Mule changed. Or maybe I did. Lyra stopped hiding in her room. She started wandering the ship. I'd find her in the engine room, listening to the reactor. She told me the fuel injector on port 3 was misaligned 2 days before the computer flagged it. She said it sang off key. I fixed it, she was right. She started eating with me in the mess hall without waiting for permission. She still didn't say much, but the silence wasn't terrified anymore, it was companionable. She'd watch me clean my weapons, her golden eyes tracing the disassembly of my pulse rifle with fascination. One evening I was sitting in the command chair, reviewing our route to the drop point, when she walked onto the bridge. She was wearing a spare gray flight suit I'd found in storage. It was 3 sizes too big, rolled up at the sleeves and cuffs, swallowing her thin frame. But she wore it like armor. "Ronin," she said. I spun the chair. "Yeah? We are being followed." I checked the scopes. "Clear sky, Lyra. Sensors show nothing for 3 parsecs. "Not on the sensors," she said, walking over to the console. She pointed a long blue finger at the dark void on the screen. "There, a heartbeat. A double pulse engine signature. It's a basked cloaked." I narrowed my eyes. Cloaking tech was military grade, or high-end pirate, or Valerius's personal cleaners. "How far?" I asked. I didn't doubt her. "Not anymore. Close," she whispered. "They are matching our drift." Waiting. Waiting for what? The ship shuddered. A metallic clang reverberated through the hull, vibrating the deck plates. "That," I growled, unbuckling. "Grappling clamps. Hard seal on the airlock." I stood up and grabbed the pulse rifle from the rack. I racked the slide. "Lyra, listen to me. Go to your quarters. Lock the door. Do not open it unless you hear my voice code, Broken Arrow. She shook her head, silver hair flying. "No, this isn't a debate," I barked. "They're boarding. These are killers, Lyra." "They are cleaners," she said, her voice trembling but her chin high. "My father sent them. They are here for me. If I hide, they will kill you to get to me." "They'll have to kill me anyway," I said, checking the charge on my chest armor. "And I'm hard to kill." "I can help," she insisted. She moved to the comm station. Her fingers flew over the controls I hadn't taught her to use. She'd been watching, learning. Their cloaking field, it generates a feedback loop. If I inverse the polarity on our sensors, "Lyra, you're not a soldier, and you are not a sensor array," she snapped back. "Fire." There was fire in those golden eyes now. "You fight, I see. That is the deal." The airlock outer door blew. The explosion rocked the ship. "Fine," I growled. "But you stay on this bridge. You seal the blast doors, and if I go down, you vent the atmosphere, take them with us." She looked at me, pale but determined. "Go." I sprinted for the corridor. The airlock corridor was filled with smoke and the ozone stink of plasma burns. 3 figures emerged from the haze. Black tactical armor, faceless helmets, no insignias, cleaners, pros. I didn't wait for introductions, I opened fire. My pulse rifle barked, blue bolts of energy slamming into the lead figure. His shields flared and popped, dropping him. But the other 2 were fast. They moved with military precision, laying down suppression fire. I dove behind a bulkhead support as plasma rounds chewed up the metal wall above my head. Sparks showered down on my silver armor. I returned fire, taking out a knee, then a visor. "2 down," I shouted into my comms. "4 more in the breach." Lyra's voice crackled in my earpiece. "They are flanking through the maintenance shafts. Ronin, above you." I looked up just as a vent grate kicked open. A cleaner dropped down, a monofilament blade swiping for my neck. I caught his wrist, the servos in my armor whining with the strain. He was strong, augmented. We crashed to the deck. I headbutted him, my scarred forehead slamming into his helmet. He staggered. I put 2 rounds into his chest at point-blank range. "Starboard hallway," Lyra screamed in my ear. "They're cutting through the wall." I scrambled up, panting. I was old for this, my bad knee was throbbing. But I moved, I always moved. I met them at the junction. It was a kill box. 3 of them. I took cover behind a cargo crate, pinned down by heavy repeater fire. The metal crate was disintegrating under the barrage. I couldn't pop my head out to aim. "Lyra," I yelled. "I'm pinned. I need a distraction." "Hold on," she said. Her voice was calm, unnervingly calm. Suddenly the ship's internal lights strobed violently, blinding white, then pitch black. At the same moment, a high-pitched screech tore through the ship's comm system. It was agonizing. Feedback. The cleaner screamed. Their helmets amplified the noise. They clawed at their ears, stumbling. For me, it was just a noise. For them, connected to a tactical network, it was a sonic hammer. I stood up. In the strobing light, I was just a silver ghost with an orange stripe. Bang, bang, bang. 3 cleaners hit the floor. Silence returned to the corridor. Just the hiss of a ruptured steam pipe and my own ragged breathing. "Clear," I rasped. "Status?" "1 left," Lyra said. "On the bridge." My blood ran cold. "Lyra!" I sprinted back the way I came, ignoring the pain in my knee, ignoring the burning smell of my own scorched armor. I hit the bridge door override. It didn't open. Sealed. "Lyra, open the door." I slammed my fist against the metal. Inside, I heard a voice. A man's voice. Smooth. Arrogant. "Unit 7 Beta, you've caused quite a mess. I am not a unit," Lyra's voice replied. She sounded terrified, but she wasn't whispering. I pulled the manual release lever. The gears ground together. "Come on, you rusted piece of junk." Inside the bridge, the scene froze me. The cleaner leader, a massive man in heavy assault armor, had Lyra by the throat. He was lifting her off the deck. Her feet kicked helplessly. He held a pistol to her temple. "Drop the weapon, Ronin," he barked without looking at me. "Or I paint the console with her blue blood." I froze. My rifle was leveled at his head, but he was using her as a shield. I couldn't take the shot, not with her in the way. She's defective, the cleaner sneered, tightening his grip. Lyra gasped, clawing at his armored gauntlet. Lord Valerius wants proof of disposal. A head in a bag will do. Let her go, I said, my voice deadly quiet. And you walk away. Walk away? He laughed. From a Ronin and a mutant? No. I think I'll… Ronin, Lyra choked out. Her eyes met mine. They weren't pleading for help. They were signaling. She tapped her finger against the cleaner's wrist gauntlet, right over his suit's power coupling. Now, she whispered. She didn't possess super strength. She didn't have claws. But she knew machines. She knew frequencies. And she was holding a severed power cable she must have ripped from the console behind her. She jammed the live wire into the cleaner's suit coupling. Zap! The cleaner convulsed as 400 volts of ship's power surged through his armor systems. His grip loosened just for a second. His shield flickered. That was all I needed. My rifle cracked once. The blue bolt took him right between the eyes. He dropped like a stone. Lyra fell to the deck, coughing, rubbing her bruised throat. I was there in a heartbeat, kicking the dead cleaner's weapon away and kneeling beside her. You okay? I asked, scanning her for injuries. She looked up at me, gasping for air, tears streaming down her blue face. But she was smiling. A fierce, wild smile. I shorted his stabilizers, she rasped. He buzzed. I let out a laugh, a genuine rusty laugh that hurt my chest. Yeah, kid, he buzzed all right. I helped her up. She looked at the dead man, then at me. She didn't look away. We need to clean this up, I said, looking around my bridge. It was a mess. Scorch marks, bodies, debris. Then we need to plot a new course. Valerius knows we're alive. He will send more, she said. Let him, I said, walking over to the main console and wiping blood off the screen. We'll be ready. I looked at the co-pilot's chair. It was empty. It had always been empty. I never trusted anyone enough to sit there. Sit down, I said, nodding at the chair. Lyra froze. That is, your second, for an officer. It's for the person who keeps the ship flying, I said. You navigate, you watch the sensors. I'll handle the guns. She walked over to the chair. She touched the worn leather headrest. Then, with a dignity that would have shamed every High Lord on her homeworld, she sat down. She strapped in. Her long blue fingers danced over the console, bringing the engines back online, optimizing the shield harmonics, doing things with the ship's brain I didn't even know were possible. I watched her. The unwanted daughter. The defective cargo. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. I sat in my command chair and engaged the thrusters. The stars stretched out before us. Course laid in, Captain, she said. Her voice was steady, strong. Take us out, Lyra, I said. She wasn't just a passenger, and she sure as hell wasn't a victim. Valerius had thrown away a queen, and now she was the queen of the Iron Mule. If you've ever been told you weren't good enough or watched someone discard a person just because they were different, you know exactly why I'm keeping her. Loyalty isn't about bloodlines. It's about who stands next to you when the airlock blows. Full burn, I ordered. We vanished into the black, leaving nothing behind but scrap metal and bad memories. The end.